Hello and thanks for stopping by my channel. I'm Lauren Lovato and today I'll be showing you how I made these notebooks. They're similar to a traveler's notebook or midori style, but they have different dimensions than a typical traveler's notebook. Once you understand how it's put together, it's easy to modify the dimensions and make different projects. I'll be showing you the materials and tools I used, but giving you some tips for using materials that you might already have. I decided to write out some of the dimensions on cards so you could screenshot it or pause it and write them down. But I made a mistake here on this first card. The measurement for the patterned paper panel labeled inside lining should be 11 inches long, not 10 and a half. When we get to that section later, I'll show you the edited measurements. But if you're pre-cutting your cardstock as we go along, be sure to make that adjustment. Today I'm using a cereal box for the front and back covers, but I've also used thin chipboard or even the cardboard backing from the 12 by 12 paper pack. The 12 by 12 paper pack will make you at least 2 notebooks with a few inserts that I'll be showing you later on. They're often on sale at the big box stores or you can use a coupon. I buy tons of pretty paper packs when I see them, but hardly ever use them because I don't want to cut into them. This is a great way to use them up. They also make really nice gift items. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, then you'll see that I had posted a few of these at the holidays. I made a few for gifts for my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my mom and my sister for Christmas. I bought this Recollections pack of paper at Michael's and I used a 40% off coupon. I started by putting glue all over the back of the 5x7 panels and centering them on the pattern paper pieces. I used my scissors to clip out the corners so that they'll fold in nicely, and repeat the process on both pieces. For the adhesive, I'm using some Scotch Quick Dry glue that I've transferred into a fine tip bottle. The fine tip is important because it helps control the amount of glue and will limit the paper wrinkling or buckling. If you have a very strong double-sided tape that you trust, definitely give it a try. The glue seems to work best for a longer lasting hold for me. If you have a favorite glue already on hand, definitely try that out and use it. I use the table to fold the flaps in so that they're easier to manipulate in a minute. Then I put glue on one of the side flaps and fold it in. I use the bone folder to really press it down hard. You'll see how the bone folder causes it to stick nicely almost immediately, with no warping or popping up of the paper edges. A little glue might seep out of the sides or the ends, but that's okay. It will all be covered up later. One of the reasons I like this size is because I can get a front and back cover out of one single sheet of the 12 by 12 cardstock. The typical traveler's notebooks have a taller and thinner measurement. I believe it's somewhere around 8 1/4 by 4 1/4, something like that. But this size allowed me to work a little differently with the papers, but you'll be able to see how this goes together and modify it for any dimensions that you want. Making a mini size notebook would be really fun for a gift idea as well. You'll see me burnishing everything really well with the bone folder throughout the tutorial. This really helps spread the glue under the paper into a nice thin layer with extra secure hold. Once I learned how to make these, I was so hooked. Now that I have the assembly and the dimensions down pat, I can crank a completed one out in under an hour. Well under an hour. At Christmas, I spent one evening pre-cutting tons of panels and cardstock, and then I went to town the next day assembling a whole bunch of different notebooks. It was a really great way to use up a lot of the pretty papers that I had stashed in my craft room. One of the best things about the quick dry adhesive is that you don't really have to wait between steps. After burnishing the glue in, the panel is really complete and you can move on without having to wait for things to dry. I repeated the process on the other panel. Once the front and back panels are complete, I take the 5 strips and the 3 by 8.5 paper that will be the spine of the notebook. I start gluing one strip in the center of the paper. And honestly, I'm just eyeballing it. If you would like to measure out the exact center, by all means go right ahead. But I found that it works just fine for me with eyeballing it. I don't feel like I need to measure out the placement. I add in the strips, placing them side by side, leaving a very small amount of space between each one. Again, I'm not measuring how much space, but if you'd like to try and measure it out with 16ths of an inch or something like that, you go right ahead. For me, I've gotten to the point where I can just look and understand how much space I need. If you're making a really big book or album, you can add more than 5 strips and make a wider spine. If you're making a smaller notebook, you can choose to use maybe just 3 strips instead of 5, and you'll have a much thinner spine. It's easy to adjust the height and proportions once you understand the completed project. There are so many possibilities to customize these and to make the size and dimensions perfect for exactly what you need. As I said before, using the bone folder and the quick dry glue really helps there to be no wait time between steps. You'll see me using the bone folder to burnish these strips into place. And after that, they're secure. There's no need to place anything heavy on it or wait for these strips to dry. Once the strips are securely in place, the next step is to glue the front and back covers on to the spine as well. I'll also be using the quick dry glue in the fine tip bottle for this step. I spread glue in a rectangular shape in the remaining area on one side of the strips and add the cover panel, leaving a small space again between the edge of the panel and the spine strip. I spread glue. I also use my bone folder to burnish the cover panel into place. When you're placing these panels, make sure that they're facing the right way, especially if you're using a design that has a specific direction or anything that has writing on it. I did check to make sure my panels were facing the right way, as I wanted to make sure the tassel pattern faced the right direction. I wanted it to look like the tassels were hanging from those ropes. I do spend a fair amount of time burnishing the front and back covers onto the spine, as this point will take a lot of wear and tear when opening and closing the notebook. It's important that it sits flush and secure against the spine. You don't want the point where the spine sticks to the front to peel up at any point. Once the panels are in place, I pick up the front or back cover and start gently rolling it against the table. You want the tiny spaces between the panel edge and the strips, or the space between the strips, to bend, using your fingers to guide the rolling. This will gradually roll the spine into the curved shape that it needs. You can see here now that the notebook will open and close smoothly with a curved spine. When I finish rolling the spine, I bend the tabs of the spine and put glue on them. I fold them down into the spine and burnish them into place with the bone folder. You can start to see here that I also spend a lot of time burnishing the spaces between the cardboard strips because this will help the folded, glued, thicker ends to roll easily with the rest of the spine. It will also help with part of burnishing the inside liner, which you'll see in a minute. You can just barely see on camera the spots where I have burnished the lines between the cardboard strips. You'll see me do it again in a minute. I start by smoothing the bone folder across the whole tab, and then I use the tip to go in between the strips. This will make the spine curve and roll easily and the notebook open and close nicely. Now you can see how well the notebook opens and closes on that curved rolled spine. The last step of the notebook shell is the liner on the inside. This is where I made the error with the initial measurement, so don't forget that this piece needs to be 11 inches long, not 10 and a half. I gently fold it down the middle to get an idea of the center, and then I spread glue across the whole panel. I focus on the edges first and then fill in the inside. I lay the piece across the middle of the inside of the notebook and position it. Then I start from one side, burnishing it against the inside cover. When I get to the middle, it's really important to burnish score lines from the top to the bottom so that the spine will still roll smoothly. This is the fussiest part because if you don't burnish and smooth the areas where the covers meet the spine strips, the lining will pull away from the cover when you try to close it up. So go slowly and really work those little spaces between the spine strips and use the bone folder to push the liner paper flush with the cover. This is also where it comes in handy to have the score lines on the tab that we folded in on the spine. It's easy to see where the lines between the spine strips are and connect them from top to bottom. You'll find that your bone folder finds those lines easily and stays in the path. As I said before, this is the fussiest part, and you have to go really slowly to make sure that the liner stays up tight against the covers. That way, when you go to close and open the notebook, it stays flat against the panels. Once you can slowly open and close and roll the spine, then you've completed the basic shell of the notebook. It should open and close fairly easily without any lining paper pulling apart. For the next part, I'm going to walk you through the eyelet holes and the elastics. Eyelets are really cheap and come in tons of colors. Today, I'll be using plain silver, but there are a lot of other options out there. I have a few tools that make this next part much easier and cleaner, but there are possible alternatives if you don't have them or can't purchase them at this time. I have a regular size crocodile and a long reach crocodile that help me punch the holes and set the eyelets. I highly recommend at least the regular crocodile because it punches through heavier material like a dream. I start by marking off the holes with a pencil on the strips that are directly to the sides of the center spine strip. I mark 4 on the top, 2 in the center, and 4 on the bottom. I am eyeballing this again, but if it would make you feel better to measure out the distance specifically, by all means go ahead and measure. My regular crocodile and my long reach crocodile, I purchased both of these items over time with coupons, but I understand that they're not in everyone's budget. If you have some kind of sharp pokey tool, or a hammer and a thick nail, or even a small drill, you could make the holes in the spine. Eyelets are really cheap, and there are also eyelets that you can buy that don't require a tool to set them. They just use a pen or other household items to put them into place. The regular crocodile reaches the top and bottom holes just fine, but won't reach the center ones. The 2 center holes is where the loop that will hold the notebook closed eventually will go. So if you'd rather use a strap or rig up some kind of magnetic closure, this step isn't totally necessary. You could even make a simple loop out of the elastic string and just wrap it around the notebook every time. I like my elastic loop to be attached directly to the notebook so that it doesn't slide or fall off. I've purchased a lot of different color eyelets from eyeletoutlet.com, and these huge variety sets are only $2 or $3. The size that I typically use is 1/8 of an inch, but the crocodiles will also punch and set the 3/16 size eyelets, so if you find them somewhere else, you can use those as well. Eyelets even come in some different shapes, so you can add some fun details to the spine. This size eyelet works well with the 1mm elastic cord that I purchased. This project doesn't have to be very expensive, which I love. Even though I initially did purchase eyelets and a long roll of elastic, both items were very cheap and have now lasted me through at least a dozen notebooks, with tons more to spare. These notebooks would make a great cost-effective craft fair item. You could even offer personalization with stamped or die-cut initials or a monogram. The paper packs often come with a sheet of coordinating panels that have words or sentiments on them, and you can use them to finish off the front of your notebook. You'll see at the end of this video how I finish off the front of this one. I cut a length of elastic cord, and again I'm eyeballing it, but feel free to find your own measurements so as not to waste any cord. I run it down one side, starting at the top on the inside and going out, then down to the next eyelet and back inside. The cord runs down the inside, skipping the middle hole, then out, and then back in. It then runs back up the middle to be tied off in a knot. The one string will give you 2 loops of elastic on the inside of the notebook. The process is then repeated on the other side. Starting at the top on the inside, it goes out, then in, then down the middle. And here I actually realized that the crocodile did not set the eyelet very well. And so I ended up using a pokey tool to punch that eyelet out and reset it with a new eyelet. So the elastic continues down the middle on the inside, then goes out, and then back in, and runs back up the middle to be tied off in a knot. If you want to forego the eyelets completely, you might be able to just wrap the elastic cord around the spine inside and out. But you might find that the notebook wears out quickly because it's just paper, and the elastic will rub against the paper on the spine a lot. It may eventually break. The last part is tying the elastic loop in the middle. You'll see me cut another random length of cord and loop it through the 2 holes. I apologize because at this point I briefly went off camera. When I come back in, you'll be able to see what I did. Here I'm just testing out the size with my fingers to see what will wrap fairly tightly around the notebook, and then I will knot it inside when I'm satisfied with the length. Once the middle elastic is complete and secured, that's really it for the completed shell of the notebook. The next part of the video is going to focus on some optional inserts. There are a lot of things you can do for notebook inserts. There are tons of printable files that you can find on the internet, or you can even create your own for things like calendars and habit trackers. You can also simply cut blank computer paper to make notepad inserts. If you like to art journal or paint, you can fill your inserts with watercolor or specialty paper. I found these packs at Michael's in the section for planners, and they happened to be on clearance at the time. I think they're normally something like $6.99, but it's also something you can get with a coupon. I liked them in particular because they come with 3 different little notebooks, and they come with a great calendar insert. I grabbed the clearance pack because the design on the front doesn't matter. I'm going to replace it with coordinating paper from our 12 by 12 paper pack. I start by removing the staples carefully from the insert. I don't have a staple remover, so I used my Cricut spatula to remove the staples. I take them out and then I set aside the calendar pages without taking them apart. The spatula worked perfectly, but a staple remover is also something that is very cheap if you wanted to have one on hand. I used the front cover that I took off the calendar insert to loosely measure and trim the pattern paper to the right size. For me, it wasn't important to have it the exact same size, so I just roughly measured. If you'd like to take the measurements off any inserts that you find, feel free to do it exactly right. As I said before, you can definitely look on the internet and find other options for calendar and printable inserts. There are a lot of things out there, and if you're good with computers, you could probably resize it yourself to however you need. After folding this paper in half, I then position the calendar pages back inside. I do have a long reach stapler, but I used a regular one for this video. It just barely reached, so if you're making anything larger than this side notebook, you might actually need to use the long reach stapler to get to the middle. Once it's stapled together, all you have to do is slip it into the elastic in your notebook. You can repeat this process for any other inserts that you want to create or recover with coordinating paper. For the last sections of the video, I'll be showing you how to make two different kinds of pocket inserts from scratch. The first is this very simple pocket that you can tuck things into easily. I've written the dimensions and the scoring line measurements on this piece of paper so you can screenshot it or pause the video and write them down. We'll be starting with the paper horizontally and making score marks here. I'm going to follow up the score lines with a black marker. That way you can see them more easily on camera. But if you are making this, you will not want to use a marker on the score lines because it will show up in the finished product. I turn the paper vertically in the scoring board and I'll be doing the same thing. I'll first be making the score lines with my scoring tool, and then I'll be using a black marker to follow it up so that you can easily see what I'm doing. It's very difficult to see score lines on camera. First, I'm going to fold the paper on all of the score lines that we made, and then I'm going to be showing you which pieces to trim off. I'll be trimming off one entire side of that bottom strip. I am also slightly notching the other side so that it will tuck in more easily and sit flush. I'm also going to cut off that whole corner where the score lines meet. At this point, you can decide which way you want the diagonal cut to go. If you want it going from the top left down to the right, or if you want to flip it over and you want the diagonal cut going from the other side. I chose a point about halfway down and then just used my scissors to guide up to the top corner. Then I'll be taking the fine tip glue and putting it on the little flaps on the side and on the bottom. Then I tuck the flaps in and glue them to the back of the panel. I use my bone folder to burnish them in so that they dry quickly and they dry flat against the side. I got a little too overzealous here and I popped it open before the bottom was completely dry. So I just went over it with my bone folder again, burnishing that glue in. It will stay closed once the glue has been burnished. This next pocket is an accordion fold pocket. It is a little more involved, but it's definitely impressive to be able to make your own from scratch and to be able to use coordinating papers from the paper pack. As with the previous pocket, I've written down the measurements and the scoring for this cardstock panel. As I did before, I'll be scoring and then following along the score lines with my marker so that you can easily see where the lines are. However, you will not want to do this with a marker when you are making your project. I start with the cardstock panel horizontally and then I will rotate it vertically. Hopefully the marker will help because I know that the camera has a really difficult time picking up score lines. I'm a very visual learner, so I need to see something before I can do it. Here I flip it vertically and make the score lines, followed by the marker lines again. The scoring board is a basic tool that I highly recommend. I find it very, very useful for a lot of different projects, and it's a good one to have on hand. I recommend it for anyone that's just starting out in paper crafting. There are a lot of YouTube videos that you can find to make different kinds of boxes and treat holders with really just a paper trimmer and a scoring board and scissors. This accordion fold pocket is another one that you can really adapt and make your own. I'm only having two little back and forth folds for the accordion fold, but if you're trying to make a larger one, or if you'd like it to really open up a lot further, once you understand how it's made, you'll be able to adapt the measurements and the scoring to make it larger. At this point, I'm also going to use the marker to cross out the sections that I'm going to be cutting out. This will give you a visual so you know what we're about to start trimming down. Here I'll start to trim off those panels that we X'd out. You'll also notice me notch slightly into the remaining sides, again as we did with the other pocket, so that they will sit flush when you go to fold the pocket up. I'll repeat this process with all of the X'd out panels. This is the shape you should be left with when you're done trimming down all of the panels. You can still see really well all of the score lines that will need to be folding. I take a corner rounder on that short flap to round off the edges. This is not necessary, but it does make for a nicer look. If you have any decorative edge punches, you can also use them at this time. I'm using my Crop-A-Dile to punch a hole in that small flap as well. I am eyeballing the center, but if you'd like to measure out the exact middle to punch the hole, that would be fine as well. I'm folding the score lines for the top and bottom flaps so that I can have them meet up and I can figure out where to put the coordinating circle in the bottom flap. I will be using the long reach Crop-A-Dile for the bottom flap. However, I would suggest that as an alternative, you could use a brad to hold the circle in place instead of the eyelet. This would eliminate the need for the long reach Crop-A-Dile for this part of the project. Now I'm taking a 1-inch circle punch and I'm cutting the 2 circles from the coordinating paper. I'm then using the Crop-A-Dile to punch a hole directly in the center of each of the circles. There are definitely ways to get the center exactly right, but as with everything else tonight, I'm just eyeballing the center. I'm taking an eyelet and the long reach Crop-A-Dile to fix this circle to the bottom flap. As I said before, you could probably use a brad to hold this one in place, and it would work just fine. That way, you wouldn't have to use the long reach Crop-A-Dile. For the top circle, you'll also be adding the elastic when you attach it to the flap. That way it will be able to tie closed to the bottom circle. I insert the eyelet into the circle and then place it upside down on the table. I take the piece of elastic and tie a loose knot and place it around the part of the eyelet that's sticking upwards. It's a little bit difficult to see, but when I take my finger away, you can see that the elastic is tied securely around the eyelet. After clipping off the end of the string that would stick out, I've put a teeny bit of the glue. I position the circle with the string tail facing down, and then I use the Crop-A-Dile to squeeze it all tightly together. Next, I'll accordion fold the sides. I start by folding all the way in, then folding the next score line out, and then folding the last flap in. I repeat the process on both sides to get a nice accordion fold. I use my bone folder to tightly burnish down the folded sides. Then I take the quick dry glue and I apply the glue to both flaps. I close up the bottom and make sure that the accordion folded sides line up perfectly with the sides of the bottom flap. I use my fingers to burnish down those lines, followed by the bone folder as well, so that they dry quickly and tightly against the accordion fold flaps. The last step is just to wrap your elastic around the bottom circle and trim off any excess that you don't need. Then your accordion pocket is complete. The very last piece I'm showing you is just a plain flap of paper. I'll be gluing both of the pockets that we made to the inside of this folder. That way it will slide nicely into the elastics that we have running through our notebook. I had forgotten to cap up my fine tip glue at this point, and I didn't want to dig around for a pin to clean it out, so I switched to the regular thick bottle of glue, just for the purpose of making the video. I still recommend using the fine tip glue for these last few steps. I apply the glue to the back of both of the pockets and then burnish them down onto the inside of this folder. I recommend centering the pockets on each side flap and not putting them too close to the middle. That way the elastics will slide nicely into the middle of this folder and they won't interfere with either of the pockets. Now you can see how nicely this little folder will slip right into the elastics in the middle of our notebook. I absolutely love this moment when the notebook has been completed and you can flip through all of the pretty inserts that you made. I have the calendar insert first that we recovered. Then I have our pockets, which I actually like to use for things like coupons or receipts. And then we have the empty notebook panel in the back. I'm adding a picture of how I finished off the front of the notebook with the pink and orange tassels and a panel that says "Always be kind" from the paper pack. Thank you so much for watching this video, and please feel free to ask any questions if you have them.